Let me thank everyone for joining us, both those of you who are with us this morning here in the S.J. Quinney College of Law Moot Court Room for the 29th Annual Wallace Stegner Center Symposium on the Energy Transition. I'm Bob Keiter, the director of the Wallace Stegner Center, and I'm pleased to welcome you. I'm going to turn, however, the initial welcome over to our dean, Elizabeth Kronk Warner, who unfortunately can't be with us this morning due to duties that took her out of town. And then I will return to the podium in just a minute or so.
Boshu Anishinaabe, hello friends. My name is Elizabeth Kronk Warner and I have the privilege of being Dean at S.J. Quinney College of Law. My pronouns are she and hers, and I'm really excited to welcome you here today, although I sincerely apologize that I can't be with you in person, as the annual Stegner Conference is a highlight of the year, and I'm sure that this year is going to be no different. As I like to do anytime that we gather together, I do want to acknowledge that this land, which we're on today, is named for the Ute tribe and is the traditional and ancestral homeland of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute tribes. The University of Utah recognizes and respects the enduring relationship that exists between many indigenous peoples and their traditional homelands. We respect the sovereign relationship between tribes, states, and the federal government, and we affirm the University of Utah's commitment to a partnership with Native nations and urban Indian communities through research, education, and community outreach activities. And today's conference is a wonderful example of that commitment, as several of the panels and panelists will be discussing how these issues of energy intersect with Indian country and development that is happening in Indian country. So I'm really excited to see our continued commitment through those panels and those discussions. But again, I'm so incredibly happy that you could be here today. The annual Stegner Conference is one of our signature events of the year, and it's just a wonderful opportunity for folks to come together, both locally and nationally, to discuss pressing issues such as energy and how it's impacting our environment and our ability to successfully thrive and live in today's world. So welcome. I hope you have a tremendous visit. I hope you enjoy the conference, and thank you so much for spending time with us today. Che Miigwech, thank you.
With that introduction, let me begin by extending some heartfelt thank yous on behalf of the Wallace Stegner Center. I'd like to thank the Symposium Planning Committee members who worked tirelessly to pull together this year's symposium. The core group includes Professor Brigham Daniels, who you'll hear from shortly, Professor Jamie Pluney, and Becky Johnson, who is an alum of the S.J. Quinney College of Law and currently senior counsel with R+ Energies. And I'd also like to extend my heartfelt thanks to our Associate Director and Program Manager, Jan Nystrom, who's really the person behind the scenes who makes everything click, both at the symposium and for the Stegner Center generally. There are many other people who've played key roles in bringing the symposium together this year. Our staff is absolutely essential to enable us to put on a program of this size and scope. And let me extend my thanks to the events staff, Chris Monty, Elisa Jenkins, Suzanne Faddis, Susan Ross, and Cynthia Lane, to our marketing staff, that would be Henry Randolph, Janelle White, Lindsay Wilcox, and Sam Mills, and our audiovisual support, Spencer Cope and Lily Johnson. Thank you all for all of the assistance that you are providing us. Let me also extend our thanks to those donors who have made the symposium possible, not only this year, but in previous years. The R. Harold Burton Foundation is actually the founding donor of the annual Wallace Stegner Center Symposium. They have been with us from the beginning for 29 years, and we're extraordinarily appreciative of their ongoing and strong support for the symposium. It enables us to bring this program to you at a modest cost. The Cultural Vision Fund provides support not only for the symposium, but also for a number of other Stegner programs, including the Young Scholar Program and our lecture series. The Nature Conservancy of Utah has been a long-standing donor for the symposium, and we're also very grateful for their support. Let's see. At this point, I've got the mundane announcements of the logistics. It'll take me a moment to remind everyone of a few things. First of all, in the interest of time, we will only introduce our speakers in terms of their name and title. Additional information about the speakers, including their full biographies, are available on the symposium website, which is online. We will provide a little more detailed introduction to our keynote speakers. There will be food and beverage, as you've already discovered, available in the lobby during the breaks, and you're welcome to bring the food into the moot court room. Lunch will be served in the lobby with additional seating available in the rooms off to what would be your right, my left, down the far hallway. The King's English Bookshop has joined us, as they have in the past, in person this year, and they will have copies of our speakers' books available, along with other relevant books for sale in the lobby. I'm sure our speakers would be happy to sign copies. If you need to leave during the presentation or come in late, please use the side entrance. This one, there's a side entrance in the back also, just so you're aware of that, so as not to disrupt presentations. If you need State of Utah continuing legal education, remember to sign up on the symposium website. We've also this year have online evaluations of the symposium program. You can fill those out on your laptop or mobile device. I should add that we find it very helpful in planning future symposiums to have your feedback, and it's also helpful for us to be in reporting to our donors as to how the symposium went, what we did right, what we might improve upon. For our question and answer session, we're going to use the Slido device. The instructions are available on the screen behind me and will be up at the conclusion of talks. They're also available on the symposium website. Remember to silence cell phones. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce my relatively new colleague, Professor Brigham Daniels, who was intimately involved in planning the symposium and who's going to kick things off for us by providing a roadmap of where we are headed today. So with that, please join me in thanking our donors, our support staff, and our speakers who are with us today.
Good morning, everyone. There was one person we didn't thank in that, and that was Bob. Bob, we are so grateful for you and your leadership is invaluable. And of course, since you're always doing the thanks, you never get to hear one. So I just thought we owed you at least that. When we all sat down to think about this symposium, it was an interesting conversation because there were 2 or 3 ideas that were batted around, and then we had one that had come from an alum. And as we went over them, we realized that we were all talking about the same idea. We were just calling it different things. And what we, in different ways, were pointing to is that we are in a moment of change. Notice that the title of our symposium is The Renewable Energy Transition, Building a Bright Future. It's not the future, it's now. We're in the midst of something, and it is just a radical change. Just to give some context here for folks who are relatively new to this game, and I'm thinking about my students in the room. By the way, we have class today, but it will be recorded. You use your time wisely. Here is sort of a. When I was in law school, there was no such job as sort of green energy. If you went to work for law firms, you would work for sort of traditional energy sources. Those sources still play a vital role in our system, of course, but more and more the growing sector, as we're looking around and we're seeing where the jobs are, a lot of it has to do with citing renewable energy. The world has changed substantially. And one of the kind of touchstones for me as I think about this, one of the very first places in the country to go 100% renewable is a place called Georgetown. Probably a lot of you have heard of Georgetown, but it's not the Georgetown you're thinking of. I'm not talking about Georgetown in Washington, D.C. I'm talking about Georgetown, Texas, which is a small town about an hour and a half north of Austin. And in that town, what actually ended up happening was the city ended up trying to figure out how to secure its energy future. It was the utility provider in that area. And as it did that, it looked around and tried to find the cheapest, most reliable source of energy. And basically what ended up happening is almost by accident, they purchased 100% renewable energy. The CNN and other news organizations began reporting that they were one of the very first cities to go entirely green. And of course, what the city ended up doing was putting up an apology on their website, basically saying this was not what we intended. We were not doing this because we're on the green team. We're doing this because we're on the green team. This is what makes sense for us fiscally, right? And more opportunities for transition are appearing, and more they're going to be happening in ways where you're not having to put your thumb on the scale in order to get there, no matter what kind of factor you're using. You're going to end up getting there just because that is the cheapest thing. I remember Heather Payne, who is in the room, a professor you'll hear from a little bit later. She was the first one who told me that in some places in Texas, there are advertising, if you go with a renewable energy company, it's weekends and nights free. And the reason is the wind continues to blow all night and on the weekends. So even as the curve, the cost curve of the supply and demand curves end up, the demand goes down, but the supply stays constant. We're in a different world. And, you can think about what that world looks like from a number of different perspectives. And that's what we're going to be trying to do while we're here. Just to kind of give you a brief note about what we hope to do here, we thought that we would ask 2 speakers to kind of help us set the stage. I will introduce each of those in a moment, but in a lot of ways, what we wanted to do was to give all of us a bit of background about where we are in the energy transition and what that means and where we're going. Really try to figure out why this is worth thinking about. We have two keynote speakers who are going to be providing some information kind of along those lines. After we hear from our keynote speakers, what we intend to do is get into the weeds and think about, what are the major hurdles? What are the areas in which there's either still a lot of conflict, where there's where the skids have not yet been greased, where there's still a lot of policy debate about how do we get from point A to point B. We're going to be going into depths on all of those, and I won't steal the thunder of those discussions, but just to give you just a few concrete examples. One of the things that we'll be talking about, and we go into this just as a concrete example, is where are we going to get all of the critical minerals that it's going to take for us to make the transition? What does that look like? What should the future of critical energy law look like? Where is it now? Where are we going? We'll be doing the same thing of thinking about transmission and permitting. But for the most part, what we hope to instill in our audience is, number one, an excitement about where we are, what our world looks like, and number two, we hope to instill and use a curiosity, if not a passion, to help us together collectively as we're trying to figure out our way over some of these more substantial hurdles. Okay, let me introduce now. We are a little bit ahead of time, Bob, and I hope that's okay.
It's unusual, but it's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. Let me introduce our first keynote. I have to say, there are so many capable people that could have filled these roles, and we really feel very fortunate that we were able to get people that have such depth of expertise and so much respect in the various fields to kind of open things up for us. Our first speaker will be Eric Beightel, who is a nationally recognized expert in energy and infrastructure, and particularly relating to environmental infrastructure. Eric Beightel brings more than 20 years of experience in the Permitting Council as the executive director. He has extensive public and private sector experience, which honed his command of the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA. We'll be talking a lot about NEPA, I imagine, during this conference, and his capacity for solving complex environmental permitting problems on the state, local, and national level. His federal experiences include serving as a senior environmental policy advisor at the Department of Transportation and as policy advisor at the Office of Management and Budget, where he developed expertise in federal permitting and review of major infrastructure projects. Beightel went on to work for WSP USA as a senior director and vice president, and HDR Inc. as an associate vice president and national lead for infrastructure policy and environmental strategy. I'll now give you Eric Beightel. Thank you, folks.
All right. So, thank you for that introduction. Good morning, and thank you all for having me here today. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you guys It's really important to be a part of this discussion because what we do now is going to set the stage for how we plan and construct the energy investments and determine our success in transitioning to a more sustainable future. The agency I lead, the Permitting Council, plays a critical role in supporting and modernizing our nation's critical infrastructure, in facilitating timely and efficient and predictable environmental review and authorizations of some of the nation's most critical infrastructure projects. From offshore wind to solar to hydroelectric projects, over half of our portfolio is renewable energy based, representing over $50 billion in infrastructure project development. We've been designated as a central coordinating body for permitting offshore wind projects in the U.S., and in that role serve as a key implementing agent of the Biden-Harris administration's goal of deploying 30 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. If permitted, these investments in clean and renewable energy will help take our country into the clean energy future, protecting our environment, helping to rebuild our economy, and providing thousands of good-paying jobs. But before I get too far into what all of that means, you may be wondering, who is the Permitting Council? What do we do? So let me take a step back and give you a little context around that. First, a little history. In 2015, Congress passed the Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act. In Title 41 of that law, hence Fast 41, our agency was created, and we were tasked with working across the federal government to coordinate federal environmental reviews and authorizations to provide transparency, predictability, and accountability, to increase the efficiency and timeliness of environmental reviews while maintaining the rigor of those reviews, not cutting corners, but providing an alternative to the standard process, the state of the practice as it currently was. This is an optional path that applicants can choose to opt into. They apply to the Permitting Council to pursue this Fast 41 coverage, and in so doing, they are offered certain benefits. In order to accomplish these goals, in order to provide these benefits, Congress provided us with some pretty clear direction. From the management of the federal permitting dashboard, which provides publicly available timelines of permitting actions, to the ability to convene regularly scheduled meetings with our federal partners, troubleshoot review issues, and the work that we are leading is making a difference in creating the predictability that we all need to effectively plan and construct these projects. As I look at our mission, I see two essential pillars. The first is making sure that those projects that seek coverage under Fast 41 are effectively getting the coverage that they need and the predictability and the efficiency in the permitting timetables. The second is serving as a center for permitting excellence, where we take the lessons learned from those covered projects and we apply those lessons learned across all of the federal government so that we lift the state of the practice across all infrastructure sectors and across all projects so that we are improving everything that we do across the federal government so that all permitting actions are better. So let's first talk about how we improve the process for our covered projects. One tool that we are able to provide is really the elevation of attention that we provide to these projects. The members of the council are deputy secretary equivalents from these agencies that you see on here. There are 16 agencies, 13 of the infrastructure agencies that are typically involved in infrastructure development, as well as the chair of the Council on Environmental Quality and the director of the Office of Management and Budget, and then me, the executive director of the council, who serves as the chair. I convene these agencies regularly, these council members regularly, and we talk about the projects themselves, but we also discuss best practices across all of the infrastructure sectors to discuss policy initiatives that we can deploy in order to advance the state of the practice. Another key way that we enable projects to see progress through the permitting timelines is to apply certain best practices of project management, which is really unheard of, sadly, in how we do project permitting in the federal government. All projects that seek and obtain Fast 41 coverage are entitled to unique benefits, including that comprehensive and transparent permitting timetable that's featured on the permitting dashboard. That timetable includes all of the required environmental reviews and authorizations required for siting, planning, and constructing the project. And while permitting timetables do, and oftentimes will shift, our statute lays out a process by which any modification to the timetable will be done in an orderly manner in full consultation with the project sponsor so that it is a predictable process, so that any slippage on the part of the federal government or on the part of the project sponsor is coordinated amongst all the parties that are involved. There is predictability and accountability on that so that we are able to maintain some schedule discipline, and there is predictability for investments, also for stakeholders who are involved in the project to know where the project is along the project timeline. Our covered projects also allow an integrated process that brings all federal agencies involved in the permitting process together to coordinate actions associated with the review of each project. One element of that process is focused attention from agency leadership with regular status checks to help maintain progress to facilitate issue identification and resolution. The centerpiece of the FAST 41 process is something you've heard me mention several times already, is the federal permitting dashboard. This public-facing website provides a tool to track projects in the permitting process and provide transparency and accountability for their progress. On this site, agency staff, project sponsors, and all members of the public can find the most important details for every covered project, including the current stage and estimated completion date, the status of environmental reviews and federal permits, and contact information for project leads. You'll also find a timetable with detailed information and up-to-date status on every federal review and authorization needed for the project. Our timetable can and should be used by all stakeholders as a tool to facilitate dialogue about our covered projects. Both this timeline and the corresponding coordinated project plans are FAST 41 tools that help provide transparency and accountability to the process and apply interagency project management strategies that would not otherwise exist. But in our role as a Federal Center for Permitting Excellence, one of the greatest tools in our FAST 41 toolbox is the ability to provide funds to our federal agencies, tribal nations, and other governments to help fix the issues that may be causing inefficiencies in the part of the permitting process. We do that via our Environmental Review Improvement Fund, which received an influx of $350 million through the Inflation Reduction Act. $155 million of that has already been allocated to our federal partners to help invest in resource development, increase capacity at those agencies to ensure that they have the resources that they need to withstand the tidal wave of applications that we see coming at them as a result of the generational investments from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the CHIPS and Science Act. We are also using those investments to build out tools, programmatic solutions, and IT investments to ensure that we have the resources that we need to make these investments to prepare ourselves for the strategies that we need for the future. We also have developed a tribal assistance program within the ERIF where we are providing resources directly to tribes who are engaged in consultations with FAST 41 projects to ensure that they have the resources that they need to meaningfully engage in those projects. We're also providing $25 million available to federal agencies so that they can make targeted investments in IT solutions, so that they can create permitting efficiencies through technology that will allow us to more efficiently process applications, more efficiently use mapping and software, data collection, data sharing, and really ensure interoperability of our IT solutions so that we are not stovepiped in the way that we do these processes. So much of what we do within the federal government is kind of agency specific, and what we are trying to do is break down those barriers and ensure that we can work across agencies so that we can be more efficient with our dollars and more efficient with our time and be more responsive to the public and the project sponsors. Now that you know generally what we do as an agency, it's time to talk about the projects. As I mentioned earlier, over half of our projects are in the renewable energy sector, with the majority of those in offshore wind. 15 of the 33 projects under our purview are in offshore wind, with South Fork in New York having the distinction of being the first FAST 41 covered project to complete the federal permitting process. In fact, today, Governor Hochul is with Secretary Holland on Long Island for a ribbon cutting project, which the project is already under construction and already providing energy to New York. It's a 132 megawatt offshore wind farm that will address East Hampton's energy needs, producing enough clean energy to power 70,000 homes. Second FAST 41 covered offshore wind project to complete the federal permitting process was Revolution Wind. This $1.5 billion project will bring 704 megawatts of clean energy to Connecticut and Rhode Island, bringing enough energy to power more than 250,000 homes. The Permitting Council's work helps deliver these critical projects, but perhaps just as importantly, Our engagement on these projects helps us identify challenges that need to be addressed across the sector or permitting program. Because offshore wind is still very much a new industry in America, we're still learning in many areas. One challenge that we are facing and actively engaged in is the protection of the North Atlantic right whale. We are currently working with NOAA and BOEM to coordinate efforts to protect and promote the recovery of these animals while responsibly developing offshore wind. The graphic on this slide comes from the North Atlantic Right Whale Strategy document, a joint initiative between NOAA and BOEM that is targeted on how to responsibly develop offshore wind on the Atlantic coast. It's a delicate balance, but one that is imperative. Climate change is affecting the survival of the North Atlantic right whale, from a changing habitat to the availability of food sources, so the responsible development of clean, renewable energy is critical to their long-term survival. As you can see on this graphic, the heat map is where right whales are most likely to occur, where their foraging habitats are, and then the shaded areas, which is a little bit difficult to see, is where the lease areas are. There are conflicts there, and these heat maps are shifting as the right whales' habitat areas are shifting as a result of climate change. So we are forced to reconcile where those lease areas are and where the right whales are occurring. We are also forced with reconciling, the junk science that is out there, that is the messaging on how offshore wind is killing whales, which is not actually true, but it is part of the messaging that is competing against what the offshore wind industry is promoting for renewable energy. And so we are fighting not only the effects of offshore wind on the right whale, which is part of the construction, the vibration impacts for pile driving, or the impacts of the vessels for the construction, but also the messaging that's combating offshore wind just as a renewable energy source. So it's a multi-pronged offensive. Another emerging challenge that we've identified in permitting offshore wind is the Outer Continental Shelf or air permit that is administered by the Environmental Protection Agency. The modeling necessary for EPA to make permit decisions is highly complex. It requires inputs that may not be readily known at the time of application. So we've had to develop standard modeling assumptions, trying to account for ships that are scheduled months, if not years in advance. And we may not know which ships those are. EPA was seeing a wide range of application and modeling quality, and it seemed that on each project, we'd encounter something new. Since the OCS air permit is often the last permit before we go to construction, any delay on that permit would have outsized impacts on the ability to construct the project. To address this emerging issue, we worked with EPA and BOEM to convene a workshop with air quality experts from EPA as well as industry to walk through the air permit program, provide context around the requirements, and share best practices and help build trust with industry. We see this as just the first step in demystifying a very complex project or process. Offshore wind may be our largest covered sector, but we have Fast 41 projects across the renewable energy landscape as well, including onshore wind and solar. This is the Bonanza Solar Project, located about 30 miles outside of Las Vegas. This $480 million project could generate 300 megawatts of energy. Our involvement on this project helped to identify challenges and communication channels between field offices and headquarters on key issues that spurred broader discussions across the region as we've engaged with other interested solar projects. The isolated nature of many field offices can lead to inconsistent treatment of policies across the region. That can create confusion on the part of the applicants. We help to bridge the gap and work with the sponsor, field offices, and headquarters to bring consistency and predictability. Now, developing clean and renewable energy is only so much that we can do without transmission to deliver it to the homes and energy users that need it. That's why transmission projects are of significant importance to our portfolio at the Permitting Council. In September, I had the opportunity to see one of our transmission projects come to life when I attended the groundbreaking for the Fast 41 covered Sunzia Southwest Transmission Project. This project will consist of 525 kilovolt transmission line that will run through 550 miles of federal, state, and private land in central Arizona and New Mexico. Once constructed, this $1 billion project will transport up to 3,000 megawatts of primarily renewable energy from New Mexico to markets in western states. New Mexico is home to a significant source of wind energy, and this project will enable a delivery of those resources to areas with high demand and help transform the energy landscape. The newest project in our portfolio is also a transmission project, the Grain Belt Express. Phase 1 of the Grain Belt Express project is a bi-directional high-voltage direct current transmission line spanning approximately 542 miles across Kansas and Missouri. If permitted, this $2 billion project could play a transformational role in helping states and utilities in the Midwest shift away from fossil fuel-based energy generation. Oops. Uh-oh. That went really fast. Sorry about that. Transmission is imperative to clean energy development, but it is often a complex sector to navigate. Currently, the process of building transmission projects can take more than a decade. Transmission line projects often involve hundreds of miles of electrical lines crossing multiple jurisdictions of federal agency lands and habitat of numerous species. Many of these projects also cross tribal lands, making tribal government coordination a critically important factor. Recognizing these challenges and leveraging an underused authority, the Department of Energy is taking steps to make the permitting review process more effective and more efficient through the proposed Coordinating Interagency Transmission Authorizations and Permits Program, CITAP. It's a mouthful. Goal of this proposed program is to accelerate the federal environmental review and permitting processes for qualifying onshore electric transmission facilities. It aims to develop a better coordinated, more streamlined process that will set deadlines for federal authorizations and permits for electric transmission on a 2-year timeline while ensuring meaningful engagement with tribes, local communities, and other stakeholders. The CITAP program is being developed as a complement to Fast 41, and we've coordinated with DOE extensively to make sure that it's not duplicative to avoid confusion on the part of applicants and the public. While our portfolio features many renewable energy projects, the path to a clean energy future also involves infrastructure projects across sectors to make it a reality. Case in point is the South 32 Hermosa Critical Minerals Project. This $2 billion project is a proposed zinc and manganese mining and processing operation south of Tucson, Arizona. The Biden-Harris administration has committed to securing a domestic supply of responsibly sourced critical minerals, and manganese is a key part of the electric vehicle and stationary storage battery supply chain. Making sure that projects like this one receive the coordination, collaboration, and transparency of the Fast 41 process is imperative to the U.S. building a battery supply chain to support the clean energy economy. Beyond that, this project is making investments in the community to help bring economic growth, good paying jobs, and keeping kids home so they don't have to move away to find work. These are real benefits. It shows what's possible when projects are planned and implemented with intention. Our job at the Permitting Council is complex, but our purpose is clear. We are here to bring coordination, collaboration, and transparency to this often complicated process in order to bring progress to projects that can help transform our country's future. If permitted, the investments I highlighted could propel our country forward toward meeting the president's ambitious climate goals while protecting our environment, strengthening our economy, and providing thousands of good-paying jobs. Fast 41 is an incredible tool to help provide collaboration, transparency, predictability, and produce more timely and efficient environmental reviews. But we at the Permitting Council, my agency, we don't issue any permits and we don't make any decisions. But what we do sit in is a very unique position where we see projects from both the sponsor's perspective and from the permitting agency's perspective. We identify challenges like the OCS air permit issue and look for solutions like the convening we supported on that topic. We promote permitting best practices and provide support through technical and financial assistance to federal agencies to help address challenges that may be causing permitting inefficiencies. That unique vantage point has provided me with some perspective that I'd like to share. The current way we plan for and permit projects isn't going to enable us to meet our clean energy goals. Permitting reform, particularly around transmission and clean energy generation, gets a lot of coverage in the nerdy press that I read. And to be sure, there are plenty of senators who aren't concerned about their next election and who are particularly motivated to move legislation this year. but so far we haven't seen it. And this isn't a big policy speech where I'm going to drop a new permitting reform proposal, but it is a series of observations. I think there are ways to approach project development to make it go smoother, absent congressional intervention, focusing on better planning and siting, community engagement, and promoting environmental benefits. I have 3 ideas that may seem simple, but I believe could improve the quality of our projects and, by extension, permit applications and permitting processes. First, improve data sharing among agencies and the public to identify protected resources will help sponsors to better plan for and site their projects, potentially avoiding conflicts in the first instance. I mentioned earlier, we are making $25 million available for IT investments that will improve data sharing and permitting efficiency. And there's also a lot agencies could do on their own to improve data quality and share information electronically. Even something as simple as data standardization across agencies so our systems can effectively talk to each other. Second, make sure that we are going out to meet people where they are. Understand communities where these projects are being built and what's important culturally and historically. Build a coalition and understand the needs of the community. And let that inform siting and development and design considerations before even starting the formal permitting process. Just last week, I was part of a tribal consultation for our agency, and a tribal governor made a very important point to us. He said that we need to do better about meeting tribes earlier in the process so their voices could be heard sooner, so that their input could be factored into the development of the process so that it could actually inform the process. Not that it comes at the end where their voices are heard and it's a checkbox of we've met the requirements, but rather it actually informs the development of the design and the siting. And I think that that is something that we don't do enough of and we should do more of. Building these expectations into project development can help applicants understand that early, meaningful engagement avoids unnecessary delays later in the process. Many sponsors do this already, but the more we normalize the behavior, the better our outcomes. Boehm recently issued an NOI checklist that detailed the expectations that Boehm has of developers before they come to the agency wanting to initiate NEPA on a construction and operations plan for offshore wind. That tool helps to weed out the projects that aren't quite ready for prime time and enables Boehm to prioritize its limited resources on projects with a greater likelihood of success. Is there a common pre-application checklist we can provide to project sponsors that establishes expectations for community outreach and engagement as part of planning and project development before seeking a permit? Maybe. Maybe this is something that we need to institute government-wide. Maybe this is something that we need to institutionalize as part of our expectations for project sponsors. Finally, we need to strive for environmental benefits where possible. This is often a stretch goal, and offsets and mitigation are great, but so are community benefit agreements and other ways that projects can invest in improving the affected community. These investments, these solutions can and should be informed by the community engagement. Find out what the people need and build that into the project. I often think about an example a former boss and mentor would often mention to me when he was Secretary of Transportation in Maryland. They were replacing the Woodrow Wilson Bridge, which spanned the Potomac, and it's part of the Beltway that circles Washington, D.C. He always liked to tell the story about how he was able to provide mitigation to a disadvantaged community in Prince George's County, which is just in Maryland, just across the river. And they were able to design mitigation into the project that would otherwise never have occurred. But he was able to put that as part of the project definition so that that community could receive the benefits as part of this major multi-billion-dollar investment. They did it because they put it as part of the project definition. They designed it into the project. How else can we institute that sort of practice? How else can we encourage that? A great example of investing in the community from our Fast 41 portfolio is the Hermosa 32 project that I mentioned earlier, where they are prioritizing local hiring and building out a workforce development program. This has the potential to provide generational economic mobility. None of what I'm sharing here is particularly groundbreaking, but it is worth a reminder. There's an urgency to build these projects now. The funding is there. The climate crisis is at a tipping point. but we still must plan these projects with intention. We've toyed with the idea of a playbook of sorts for industry, a suite of best practices, perhaps, that would help project sponsors do better permitting. Perhaps if I'm still around next February, we'll start to explore what that looks like. But I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that despite our best efforts and best laid plans, that sometimes you cite an offshore lease area and the whales move, and what you had was a great idea, just turned out to be a lot more complicated. But those instances should be the exception and not the rule. And with better planning and coordination at the beginning, we can do better permitting and get to construction sooner. I firmly believe that. Thank you for having me here today, and I look forward to learning from you all throughout the day and tomorrow. We can open it now for questions.
Great. We have here the ability to ask questions. You go to slido.com, and there will be a box that opens at the very top. It already has the hashtag there for you. Sorry. Are we better now? Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we have a minute here to ask some questions. We have a few minutes to ask some questions. Go to slido.com if you have a question. It's slido.com. You'll see a text box at the top of the screen that says already has a hashtag in there, and you can just write Stegner, and it will allow you to ask questions there. Let me ask if a few that have already been asked. This one, with all the new federal money to support your work, how are you tracking where the money is best spent? How are you making sure the funding is going to where it can best have an impact? What metrics are you using for tracking that?
That is a very important question. So the $350 million that we received through the Inflation Reduction Act, I mentioned we've already allocated $155 million of that to about 6 agencies that are represented on the council. The way we allocated those funds, we essentially asked the agencies, what do you need right now in order to stem the tide of the surge of applications that you see coming? And they gave us a response, and we negotiated essentially with them to see, how does that make sense? Is this the best use of funds? And then we are now in the process of actually determining the best way to measure the effectiveness of those dollars. And those metrics will essentially say, by investing these dollars here, we are able to reduce permitting timelines by this, or we were able to effectively increase efficiency by X or Y amount. It's going to be different for each agency because the funds went to different purposes, but that is something that we are very much focused on, because obviously we have to be accountable to Congress, we have to be accountable to the American people, and we want to be transparent on how those dollars are being spent. So it is something we are very much focused on, and we don't have an answer today, but we will in the next few months.
Excellent. And just to let you know, even if you don't have a question, there are questions that are up on slido.com. You can thumbs up one if you really like one of the questions, and I'll try to prioritize some of those. So here is another question that I think is worth talking about. Can you provide some insights about the lowest hanging fruit that improved data sharing can provide?
Yes. So there are, I think the easiest would be just tracking progress of how projects are. So our dashboard, we track, right now we have 33 projects on the dashboard, and that's the only process by which we track the progress of projects that are going through the environmental review process. Each agency has some sort of system that they generally track, maybe the way projects are progressing through their NEPA process or their permitting process. They don't have data standardization that they're able to talk across agencies to figure out how NEPA is progressing across agencies. So if OMB, the office within White House, says, hey, tell us how you're tracking all of your NEPA each agency is going to spit out something different, and it's apples to oranges to bananas to watermelons, essentially, in the data. So if we were able to standardize how the agencies are tracking that information, and we were able to collate that in a simplified manner, we would actually have better information across government in a way that would, combat a lot of the arguments that we have that are based on anecdotes that say that NEPA is the problem. Also enable us to provide some targeted fixes where there might actually be an issue somewhere. But instead we are fending off attacks on some of our environmental processes that are based on one-offs, as opposed to looking at it programmatically based on real data, because we simply don't have it.
Okay, great, thank you. One of our commenters wants us to reflect a little bit about a potential confusion between conservation benefits and benefits to local economies. And specifically, the author says, I didn't hear about how the council does outreach with NGOs that incorporates feedback. Again, there seems to be a confusion between conservation benefits and benefits to local economies. I didn't hear how the council does outreach with NGOs and incorporates that feedback.
So maybe to parse the question a little bit, the permitting council itself, as I mentioned earlier, we don't issue any permits, we don't make any decisions. We work to support the agencies that are represented on the council. And those agencies are the ones who actually do the environmental reviews and permittings, but we are supporting them in those actions. We do facilitate some of those conversations, and we do outreach to industry, to NGOs, to try and learn from them what their pinch points are, what their concerns are, and we try to use that to inform our best practices and our recommendations to the agencies. I don't know, I mean, I think the answer to that is we are trying to incorporate all voices, all feedback to include in our best practices that as we develop them.
Another question here, and this one, I realize you may not have the magic 8 ball to give us the answer to this one, but let's see how it goes. Is Fast 41 something that will outlive administration changes?
Yes, it was. So Fast 41, when it was created, created in 2015, it was essentially a pilot program that had a sunset clause. With the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed in 2021, the sunset clause was removed. So it is now a permanent creature. So we have no sunset clause. We are a permanent agency. We will be here until Congress decides to rescind us, which is unlikely to happen because fortunately we have bipartisan support.
Okay. Here is a I thought we'd probably hear about NEPA, and here we have one. Permitting reform advocates often include cutting down public comment periods within the NEPA process. How do you balance streamlining against prioritizing local communities?
I don't think that there is any way to accelerate the process that is palatable if it also reduces the opportunity for public comment. The only way that we can effectively make decisions is to have meaningful public engagement. And that was one of my core principles in my observations. Meaningful public engagement is a core tenet of NEPA, and it's one that we have to defend at all costs. There are ways to ensure that we do it. There has to be a way to, at some point you have to say, we're done, but you can't truncate it in such a way that you don't allow for meaningful opportunity for engagement. It can't go on forever. I think we all have to acknowledge that, but there has to be you can't also make it so that it is so difficult that people aren't able to engage.
Great. This is from Mason at UAMPS. Can you elaborate more on the human resource challenge of getting agency staff with strong project management expertise, given these individuals are being sought by developers that offer better pay? What is being done in this area?
Yeah, that's a difficult question to answer. So There's no denying that there are human resource challenges within the federal government. It's difficult to hire, it's difficult to retain, but the draw to the federal government is, you are working with a sense of mission. You are working with a passion. We met with the Assistant Secretary for Fish and Wildlife and Parks last week, and we were talking about how I asked her specifically, is it hard to hire biologists? Like you're trying to get some money from us to hire biologists. If we give it to you, is it going to be hard to hire biologists? And, her answer was no. Biologists love to work here. It's like working for the big leagues. Like you're getting called up to the NFL to work for Fish and Wildlife Service. I think that is true for a lot of these agencies. The people who truly believe want to work for the agencies because the mission is something that they truly believe in. There is a pay gap. There is, other things that people may consider. So there's going to be differences in opinion on the types of folks who are going to work for the different types of employers. But the benefits are great for the federal government. Hours are great, and the mission's great.
All right, and we just have a couple minutes left, but let's try one or two more of these. A writer asks, please address the role that national security plays and should play in the process of upgrading and modernizing the nation's energy grid, especially as far as permitting is concerned.
So we do have some national security concerns as part of the energy grid. Naturally, I think from our perspective, it is absolutely essential, obviously, that we have a core function for protecting our national security interests on the grid. That is slightly outside of our purview, and I will punt that question as delicately and inelegantly as I can, and just say that, yes, it's extremely important, and I will defer.
Okay. You mentioned that transmission projects can take decades. How does that timeline fit, given all the renewable projects that are incentivized through the Inflation Reduction Act?
I think we want to say that historically, transmission projects can take decades. In the future, we expect to cut that timeline down substantially. The SITAP program that I mentioned is looking to reduce that timeline down to 2 years. I don't think we're going to get to 2 years, immediately, but through better coordination up front, looking to reduce it to, 5, 4, then incrementally down is kind of the goal. It will have to be a stepped process, but the 10-year timeline for transmission is going to be a thing of the past.
Okay. Here's a more specific question, and this may be, we'll see how it goes, but this could be the last one for you anyway. Many tribes have been dissatisfied with the permitting of the Sunziza line through the traditional cultural areas. Why was that line not permitted along existing power line corridors rather than through the San Pedro watershed?
So that is BLM, I think, as the lead agency, is more appropriately equipped to answer that question. We were, as a permitting council, again, we don't make the decisions. We support the agencies in their efforts for that. I know that BLM has been in coordination with the tribes on that, and there is active litigation off and on that project. So I think for that question also, I would defer back to BLM for that.
All right. We're at time, so I have to thank you. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. It is now my pleasure to introduce Alexandra Klass. Alex, are you here? Oh, there. Hi. Great. Great. So Alex is a friend, and I was looking around trying to spot her. I just wanted to make sure before I introduced her that she was here. Not need to get a drink of water or something before she started. So Alexandra B. Klass is the James D. Degnan Professor of Law at the University of Michigan Law School. She teaches and writes in the areas of energy law, environmental law, natural resources law, tort law, and property law. In 2022 and 2023, she served in the Biden-Harris administration as the Deputy General Counsel for Energy Efficiency and Clean Energy Demonstrations at the U.S. Department of Energy. Professor Klass, recent scholar work published in many of the nation's leading law journals addresses regulatory and permitting challenges to integrating more renewable energy in the nation's electric transmission grid, citing and eminent domain issues surrounding interstate electric transmission lines and oil and gas pipelines, and applications of the public trust doctrine to modern environmental law challenges. She is co-author of a leading textbook in energy law concepts and insights, as well as energy law and policy, as well as a natural resource place-based book of problems of cases. Before joining the University of Michigan faculty in 2022, Professor Klass was a distinguished McKnight University professor at the University of Minnesota Law School, where she was a member of the faculty from 2006 to 2022. She has been a visiting professor at Harvard Law School, Uppsala University in Sweden, and the University of Arizona Rogers College of Law. Prior to her academic career, Professor Klass was a partner at Dorsey Whitney in Minneapolis, where she specialized in environmental law and land use litigation. I now introduce you to the great Alex Klass.
Thanks, Brigham, and good morning. I'm really honored to be giving one of the keynote addresses at the Stegner Center conference today, and I'm really looking forward to all the panel discussions and engaging with all of you, both online and in person. It's also just great to see so many friends here from the University of Utah, from other schools, and even got to see my former partner, Bill Prince, from the Salt Lake City, Dorsey and Whitney office, who I used to work with quite a bit. So it's great to be here in Salt Lake City. So the title of my talk is Forging a Clean Energy Future. And I'm going to use my time to really speak more generally about the trends that we're seeing in the clean energy transition, some challenges that we face, and some new opportunities that we have to overcome those challenges. I'm also going to urge you to think about the clean energy transition as something exciting, innovative, and beneficial for society, rather than the message we often hear in the press about difficult choices, loss of opportunities, and trade-offs. I think the narrative here is really, really important, and I want to push back against a lot of the doom and gloom that we hear about climate change and our inability to address it. I think this message of fear and despair is often really counterproductive, and it takes the focus away from the tools that we have to engage in a clean energy transition that can address the harms of climate change, the harms of localized air pollution. It can promote economic development and really bring us into the clean energy future. So with that, I'm going to show you a lot of pictures and talk about a lot of different issues in the energy landscape, and I'm really looking forward to your thoughts on this. So I'm going to start really broad, recognizing that we've got sort of different levels of expertise in the room. And I love this chart because it shows, we often think that like change is really, really slow, but it's actually not. We've made a lot of changes in our energy landscape since this country was started. Back in 1776, when we mostly used wood, that's the renewable energy that you see really for the first 100 years. Then, of course, we had the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s, where coal comes on the scene, that's the black line. And then we start driving cars, right? And then petroleum becomes our largest source of energy, which it still is today because of the dominance of petroleum in our transportation system. Then we invent natural gas pipelines, and all of a sudden we can bring natural gas all around the country, and we see a big rise in natural gas. After World War II, the commercialization of nuclear, that's the red line, and so then nuclear comes on the scene. And then, of course, you see around 2007, right after that, you see a big increase in natural gas, a big decline in coal, and as most people know, that is the commercialization of fracking. All of a sudden, we have lots of natural gas prices decline, and electric utilities start using natural gas much more in the electric system. So we see that swap. Also around the same time, we see not as significant, but still very significant rise in renewable energy. At this point in time, it's not wood, but it's wind and now solar, as well as biofuels in the transportation sector. So a lot of change over time. This slide and the next slide really show the same data, but they bring it out to 2022. And you see, though, that we're still using a lot of fossil fuels, right? The bulk of our energy, despite the changes that we've seen the last 20 years, is fossil fuels. It's petroleum, it's natural gas, it's coal, rising share of non-fossil fuel, which of course is nuclear plus renewables. This shows it in percentages. Again, same data, but just displaying it differently. And again, you see the decline of wood, the increase, and then the decrease in coal, and when different energy resources come on the scene and their percentage in the US energy mix. And this is a snapshot in time, 2022. You see where we have petroleum, natural gas. Petroleum's the biggest, natural gas number 2. Renewable energy broken out between biofuels, the rest mostly used in the transportation sector, the rest mostly used in the electricity system, and coal, of course, much smaller than it used to be. Now, of course, these slides I've shown you are all energy, so that includes both transportation and electricity. These next slides are looking just at electricity generation. So you see really petroleum drops out of the equation. We use very little petroleum in our electricity sector today, only where we don't have other sources. So in Hawaii and Alaska to some extent. And there, coal was the dominant source of electricity for a very, very long time, until, of course, fracking, renewable energy policies, state policies, a mix of all of those has led to the decline of coal, the increase of natural gas, and the increase of renewable energy. Same data, this one going out to 2022. This one's just looking at renewable energy and how that has switched, at least since 1950. Of course, we've been using hydropower for a very long time to generate electricity. We're not building new big hydropower facilities, so that has been very flat. And we've had, a bigger increase in wind, and then you see more recently a larger increase in solar. And if we look at it in terms of percentages, you once again see the decline of coal-fired generation, the increase in natural gas and zero carbon generation, and a decrease in petroleum-fired generation. And here we have our snapshot in time for 2022. So renewables have grown quite a bit, but we need to do much better. We're not building a lot of new nuclear. We're not building big new hydropower. So we need to really accelerate our growth of wind and solar energy to then continue to decrease our percentages of coal and also decrease our reliance on natural gas. All right, so what are some of the federal and state clean energy goals we have to get there? So the Biden administration, when President Biden came into office, came out with some goals that are listed here in terms of reducing U.S. emissions 50% from 2005 levels by 2030, 100% carbon-free electricity by 2035. I'm going to spend some more time on that later, how we might get to that. And then a focus in on some of the projects that Eric talked about. Projects that are either being permitted on federal lands or in offshore waters. The federal government has more control over those. So offshore wind energy, 30 gigawatts by 2030. And then this is actually in both congressional legislation as well as a Biden administration goal, 25 gigawatts of wind, solar, and geothermal energy permitted on public lands by 2025. I think, Eric, we're going to get to that one, at least in terms of permitted. I see fingers crossed over there. And just for context, recognize that most of our wind and solar, really the bulk of our wind and solar energy to date has been on private lands, not on public lands. But we have lots of public lands available for that. All right, so we sort of have some unified goals here by the federal government. And we have a real mix, a real diversity of what used to be called state renewable portfolio standards, now are called clean energy standards in most states that have updated those. And this is as of December 2023, which is good because there was a lot of state activity in 2023. So a map from a year ago would not reflect our current reality. And for those of you who don't spend a lot of time with RPSs and CESs, I mean, the big difference between the two is, these initial goals, the initial renewable portfolio standards, started to be adopted by states using, as early as in the 1990s. And the focus really was on renewable energy, new renewable energy, wind, solar, sometimes geothermal, sometimes biomass. Now, of course, we have more a focus on the need to decarbonize and carbon-free energy. So a clean energy standard is to promote both renewable energy, but also other forms of carbon-free electricity. So existing nuclear, new nuclear, potentially natural gas plus carbon capture and sequestration. And so by doing that, it allows states to set more aggressive goals for clean energy. So you could have a decarbonized system that's at 100%, and that is a mix of nuclear, wind, solar, geothermal, potentially fossil fuels with CCS if the price of those goes down. So you see, I lived in Minnesota for over 30 years, and so Minnesota now has a goal of 50%, 55% renewable energy by 2035, and then 100% carbon-free by 2040. My new state of Michigan, I've only lived there since the fall, had a very, very modest renewable portfolio standard in the past. It now, in this legislative session, moved to 60% renewables by 2030. That's going to be a big increase for the state of Michigan, and then 100% carbon-free by 2040. So the states that are in green are ones that have both renewable mandates and clean energy mandates. The ones in blue are the ones that tend to have mostly older renewable portfolio standards, or they're only focusing in on renewables. So, Hawaii, for instance, is not going to be building a nuclear plant anytime soon. They want to get to 100% renewable energy because that's what they're building in Hawaii. And so these are mandates that are on electric utilities in terms of the percentage of electricity they sell to customers, and there's various deadlines in between. It's fun to study and talk about RPSs and CESs. I just did that in my energy law class yesterday. Okay, so what are our trends, particularly with regard to wind and solar? Because that's where we're going to see our big increases for carbon-free electricity. So what are we doing right now to get to some of those federal and state mandates and goals? So if we talk about wind, as many of you know and have probably seen this map before, our wind resources are not evenly distributed across the country. They are in the areas that are in the purple, in the red, in the orange. It's just not very windy in the Southeast. And so that's not a great place, at least using current technology, to build wind turbines. But there's a lot of places right down the middle of the country, further out west, and in the upper Midwest as well, that are very favorable to build wind energy. And to some extent, that's where we've seen wind energy installed. So this is the actual amount of installed capacity in megawatts. And to some extent, it matches this map, right? Certainly in Texas it does, which is, as many of you know, the big leader in wind energy. And also, Iowa, Oklahoma, Kansas, other states with great wind resources have installed a lot. But then there's also states like North Dakota and South Dakota that, because they really don't have policies to promote wind energy, are kind of underperforming. So there are lots of areas of the country. It's true also Montana, Wyoming, even in Colorado. These are areas where there's been a lot of wind built, but if you look at this map, how much could be built, it's a lot more. And so that is where policy helps, permitting reform helps, financial support helps as well. Solar, on the other hand, is much more evenly distributed across the country. Yes, you can have some of the really big concentrating solar facilities and really larger facilities in the desert Southwest where you see the red, but you can have good solar all over the country. And solar is being built all over the country. But what that also means is policy is more important, is just as important, and actually more important here because you can build it everywhere. So you see solar tends to be built where there's favorable economic and policy conditions, because solar comes in all shapes and sizes. rooftop solar, commercial solar, parking lot solar, ground-mounted solar, and then, of course, large projects like this. I don't think this is one of your Fast 41 projects, right? Is this mostly private land, and that's why you weren't involved? This is a new one. Yeah, Eric didn't know I was going to be asking him lots of questions during my presentation, but now you're on the spot. So there's a lot of really large, big PV solar projects, being built out in California, in the desert, probably around here as well, in Utah. So large and small. Now, where are we seeing our solar built? Of course, California has been a big proponent of solar and has lots of good areas for solar. So they are the leader, but I think Texas is quickly overtaking California. There's a lot of solar being built in Texas. You can build anything in Texas. And Florida, which was very slow to the solar game, even though it's very sunny, because the utilities had resisted it. There's now a lot of utility scale solar being built in Florida and North Carolina as well. So there are some states that really didn't have much solar installed for a while, now has a lot. But you see some of the other states like, Minnesota and New York and Massachusetts, that the reason that they have a lot of solar is not because it's like really all that sunny in Minnesota, although it's sunnier than you would think, is that they've had very favorable policies to build solar. We also have lots of public lands available for renewable energy development. These are, I think, a lot of the projects that are on Eric's dashboard. And particularly and these are in the West, of course, and I would say we've sort of underperformed to date in terms of building renewable energy on public lands. But the BLM in particular, where a lot of these projects can be built, is really prioritizing a lot of lands for solar development. There are BLM solar planning regions, which was focused more on the southern half of these states, but then as of this year, there's solar planning regions being added up in the northern states, Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, Washington, and Oregon, to basically figure out where are the best places for large-scale solar, make it really easy for developers to build there, and know in advance which are areas that developers should stay away from, either because it's sensitive land, is legally protected, it's being used for something else. And BLM just put out this map, again, showing the area, those northern states are going to be part of this expanded BLM solar planning region. So we hopefully will see a lot more, particularly solar development in these states. Offshore wind, Eric talked about offshore wind. We are going, almost from zero, even though in Europe, as many of you know, offshore wind is a very developed industry and provides a huge amount of electricity. But I am optimistic that, as we get some of these projects that are starting to come online, the one in New York, off the coast of Massachusetts, we can go from zero to a lot pretty quickly because these are large projects. But we need to do a lot more. Why do we need to do a lot more? Our offshore wind potential is great, right? So we don't have this problem of variability that we do across the country with regard to onshore wind. And of course, where is our population located? It is not concentrated in the plain states where we have all the wind. It's concentrated on the coast. So if you can build offshore wind, all you need is a transmission line going from the wind farm to the grid at the first state. And these are all these projects are being built by states that really want offshore wind. And so you don't have the problem of having to build multi-state onshore electric transmission lines to get onshore wind from the plain states to either the East Coast or the West Coast. And I'll talk a bit more about the difficulty of building transmission lines. So offshore wind provides quite a bit of potential. I think this map is a little bit out of date now, but it just shows all of the projects that are in various stages of permitting, looking just at the Atlantic. There's also floating wind turbine proposals in the Pacific Ocean and also more in the Gulf of Mexico. I'm hoping for wind projects in the Great Lakes. This icebreaker project that is listed there has met its demise for now, but there's lots of evidence showing that the Great Lakes have some really good potential for offshore wind energy as well. And this slide sort of shows where we've come from just the year 2000. This is a fairly recent slide that EIA put out. And of course, the light blue is wind. And so that's what we were building for a long time. And then you see solar come on to the scene. And then the green is energy storage, which we haven't talked about yet. When you have solar plus storage, which are battery storage, which are what most of our big solar projects are now, you can address the variability of wind energy, of solar energy, because you can store it, so you don't have to worry about it being sunny all the time or being windy all the time. So as battery prices drop, this becomes really, particularly with solar, the best way to build these projects. So you look at 2022 and that massive increase in investments in battery storage, that is battery storage, and the increase in that is what is given the credit for keeping the lights on in Texas over the last over the last heat waves and cold snaps. So you're really seeing this change. We do not have any dark blue offshore wind on this map yet, but I'm optimistic that the next map will show some offshore wind as well. So you can kind of see where we've been going from 2000. The problem is it's not quick enough. So remember that 100% carbon-free electricity goal by 2035 of the Biden administration. That 100% carbon-free electricity is also a goal of many states in their state clean energy plan. So what do we need to do to get there? And it's not the status quo, I will tell you. So the National Renewable Energy Lab did really a great analysis that came out last year and basically said, how much wind and solar do we need to build to get to 100% clean electricity? And NREL estimates 4 times our current deployment rate. So kind of what we're doing now, our increase now, and then times 4. We also need to continue to grow storage and battery technology, and we need a lot of interstate transmission lines to move all that renewable energy around. So this is a slide from their study. And of course, they had to do multiple scenarios, multiple pathways, because we don't know what's going to happen between now and 2035. Are these Fast 41 projects going to work? And as Eric said, now we're going to be able to build big transmission lines in 2 or 3 or 5 years instead of 15 years. If we can build all those transmission lines, then we don't actually need as much wind and solar. What if carbon capture sequestration really takes off and becomes cost effective? Then again, we don't need to build quite as much. So they did multiple different scenarios. They found under all of those scenarios, the benefits of moving to 100% clean electricity exceeded the additional power systems cost in every single scenario. And on this slide, it sort of talks about what those climate and health benefits of decarbonization are in terms of lives saved, the health costs associated with our use of fossil fuels that are often invisible to us. We're used to them now, right? That people die from their exposure to air pollution, asthma, all of the horrible things that are associated with air pollution. We just think that's a part of life, but those will go away as we move to a clean energy future, and we need to keep that in mind. It's not an additive system that we're just building new wind and solar on top of our existing fossil fuel energy infrastructure. So basically trillions of dollars in net benefits to society under all these different scenarios. Okay, but we still need to figure out, if we're going to stick with the 4 times, how much land is that going to take? How many new gigawatts of wind and solar? And it is a lot, right? So 946 gigawatts of new solar, 1,200 gigawatts of new wind. How much land is that going to take? The answer is it depends. It depends if you count this space between wind turbines as unusable or not, even though it is usable. If you have a farm or a ranch and you have wind turbines on those, you have the land that's taken up by the footprint, but then in between the footprint of the turbines, you can do grazing, you can do farming, you can use it as it was before, if anyone who's been by a wind farm has seen. So if you only count the footprint of the wind turbines, it's 0.44% of total US land, and that's using the highest estimated land use scenario in the NREL study. Like no CCS, no transmission build out. But if we include the whole perimeter of the wind turbine and assume you can't use anything between the wind farm, and you can't use anything between the turbines, then it's up to almost 6% of total US land. And that's a lot, right? So what does this look like on a map? NREL gives us that. And so you see the amount of land, equivalent amount of land we now use for livestock grazing and feed. You see the equivalent amount of land for urbanized areas, for oil and gas leases, for corn ethanol. roads, building footprints, and then you can see in the green utilities, that's the footprint of the utility scale solar. And then with wind, you see the very, very small orange box. That's if you're just using the direct impacts. Obviously, a much larger indirect impact if you're counting all the space between the turbines. Okay, so what are the challenges that we have to achieving this needed wind and solar build out? Some of these challenges we're making good progress on, others not so much. So the economics of clean energy, doing really well. Wind and solar energy are our cheapest forms of new electricity generation, period, across the country. Couldn't have said that 5 years ago. Certainly couldn't have said that 10 years ago. It's the low-cost form of electricity generation. Incentives, I'll talk about those later, but we got lots of financial incentives in our recent federal legislation for clean energy development. Same with the financing, materials and minerals need. We're making really good progress on that. Same with technological developments. None of these scenarios require us to improve the technology of wind and solar energy. We will, and so basically they're sort of overestimating the costs and overestimating what we're going to need to build, but the scenarios, assume current technology. Okay, but we have some challenges that we're not making as much progress on. One are state and local siting and permitting barriers to new wind and solar plants, and also to interstate electric transmission lines. That remains a challenge, and I'll talk about each one of these. Not only barriers, but it's just slow. It takes a long time. That's true if you're talking about federal facilities, like facilities that need federal permits, like Eric was discussing, but also ones that either need local permits or state permits. And you also, as new projects are accelerating, you see additional community opposition to new wind and solar plants, and that remains a challenge. So I want to talk briefly about the role of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act in moving this forward. And it is pretty significant. And if you talk about and just look at investment in federal climate spending, the last big investment that we had was the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act in 2009. And you compare that to what we now have with the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and also the CHIPS and Science Act. So this has just been through 2021, and we've never seen investments and incentives and grants and federal loans for a clean energy transition like we've seen the last 2 years. So it's really, really exciting. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but these are just some of the key clean energy and carbon reduction provisions of the bipartisan infrastructure law in terms of grants for new types of technologies, commercialization of existing but nascent technologies. It's on the transmission side, it's on advanced nuclear, projects in rural and remote areas, carbon capture, clean hydrogen. And then in the Inflation Reduction Act, even more money going to wind, to solar, to states for their own programs for decarbonization. Billions of dollars in tax incentives and grants for clean manufacturing to get to the materials and minerals component of all of this. And then I do want to highlight these technology neutral clean energy tax credits, the production tax credit, the investment tax credit. We've had those tax credits for many years, but they would be short-lived and they were always about to expire. And so that led to a lot of uncertainty in terms of financing and investment. Now these are running at least through 2032, and another nice provision of these is they have what are called direct pay provisions. So in the past, governments, rural electric cooperatives, universities, cities couldn't really take advantage of these tax credits because they didn't pay taxes, right? Now you can convert these to direct pay provisions. So it's just a broader group of entities that can take advantage of these tax credits. Also do want to highlight almost $10 billion to the USDA for clean energy transition in rural electric cooperatives. So serving rural areas and allowing electric cooperatives to really make a difference here. Okay, so I told you I would mention the issues with interstate electric transmission lines. In terms of getting particularly wind energy from the middle of the country to population centers, you need interstate electric transmission lines, so large transmission lines that cross multiple states. So here was an article about the SunZia project, which Eric talked about. Super important project. It's going to be able to bring a lot of renewable energy to population centers. It took 15 years to build. We can't do projects in 15 years. That is not going to work. So we've got problems in terms of coordinating federal permitting. A lot of this was on federal lands, but we have just as many problems in terms of dealing with multiple states with that have different permitting authorities and different standards and different reasons to grant or deny an interstate electric transmission line. So this is from the Princeton Net Zero report that did some modeling to look at, okay, well, here's our US electric transmission system today. This was as of 2020. And they were looking at kind of a net zero energy goal. And this is what we would need to build by 2050. And this is kind of looking at sort of a net zero economy, so broader than what we've been talking about so far, but it's a lot of new transmission, a lot of new big transmission, both the more of the sort of black and white lines, but then also these really, really larger purple lines as well. NREL has also done a really important study and looking if we connect up all the different regions of the country with high voltage direct current transmission lines, we can ship solar and wind energy constantly across the country from where it's being generated to where it's needed, taking advantage of our different time zones. People are doing different things at different times. It's sunny at different times in different places, and you can use both wind and solar. These lines, of course, are not built, but if we had them, basically it acts as a big, massive battery, and so deals with a lot of our reliability problems in addition to decarbonizing our electricity system. Here's another map that sort of shows a lot of these projects that are in various stages of permitting that they're called sort of transmission projects ready to go. We basically just need the last permits for them. I think, Eric, you mentioned the Grain Belt Express. So that's on, that's listed here. The So Green one in the middle of the country, I don't know if you can see that far. That one is proposed to be underground and to follow existing railroad rights of way. So there's some really innovative projects here. A lot of them are interstate and some are intrastate, just within one state. But these are projects that are sort of already sort of far along. And if we can get more of these online, it's really gonna decrease, first of all, the footprint that we're gonna need for wind and solar energy. It's gonna really increase reliability of our electricity system and help us deal with the ever-increasing storms and droughts and other things that are causing a real problem for reliability. Okay, so that's transmission lines. Generation plant challenges. So when we want to build a new wind farm or a new solar farm, there's a lot of challenges associated with that are slightly different than what we have for transmission lines that really cover, a wider geography. So part of it's politics. We have a lot of opposition by fossil fuel companies and politicians that support fossil fuel interests that start engaging in these township meetings or state public utility commission meetings, and sometimes in the form of funding local groups, sometimes in their own right. We also need enough land, right? It's not that this is costless in terms of the land we need. We understandably have community opposition to new wind and solar plants and transmission lines. People don't like change. They're worried about value, the decrease in value to their homes, which is usually their largest asset. And oftentimes it's not explained very well or provided in terms of how is this going to benefit the community. So I think it's incumbent on developers, on regulators to address some of the really important community issues and also environmental justice and energy justice concerns, in the sense that are these projects getting built in the areas that have always borne the burden of energy infrastructure in the past. And there's a lot of rural community concerns. I mean, a lot of these projects are going to be built in rural areas because that is where the land, the available land is. And those need to be addressed as well. So if you follow the trade press, you can see lots of newspaper articles like this. Local communities putting bans on wind farms, banned on solar projects, oftentimes tearing communities apart because oftentimes you have landowners who really want these projects. Now they don't need to sell the family farm because they're going to get some really nice revenue from the solar that is developed there or from a wind farm, and then their neighbors don't want it. And so you actually have individual property rights versus the community's rights versus a lot of misunderstandings about what the project will or won't do. And so you see sort of two things happening. You see local governments putting sometimes outright bans on new wind or solar projects. And you also see states, the states that have the new clean energy standards, the ones that were in green on the map I showed you before, taking some power away from local governments to make those decisions. So some ways to address these challenges. One is through siting and permitting reforms. So as I said, I lived for over 30 years in Minnesota, and Minnesota has always had statewide siting for coal plants, gas plants, wind farms over a certain size, and then once solar, kind of came on the scene, solar plants over a certain size. That's always gone to the Minnesota Public Utility Commission. Local governments are in charge of smaller projects. So it's not super controversial in Minnesota because that's just always how Minnesota has done it. Other states have done this more recently. Oftentimes it's states that have recently adopted clean energy goals and had local siting authority in the past. So Illinois, Maryland, Michigan, California, and New York have all moved from local siting to state siting authority, at least for projects over a certain size, more recently. So Michigan just did it this year. It's incredibly controversial, and there'll be a ballot referendum. Lots of direct democracy in Michigan, I have learned, as opposed to Minnesota. Lots of things to vote on in ballot referendums. I think that's probably popular out here in the West, as to whether to overturn that law or not. So we will see. But citing, making changes to who is in charge of the permitting process can be helpful in terms of moving these projects along. And also, regardless of who's doing the permitting, whether it's a local government or the state, expediting the permitting process. Kind of what Eric was talking about on the federal side, doing that on the state side or even the local side. Coming up with like build-ready sites. New York and I think Massachusetts has done this, where basically the state gets a site ready and says, this is good to go. Who are the developers that want to build a solar project or a wind project here? I also think I have a new paper that's coming out with Professor Hannah Weissman, who's at Penn State Law School, and it's called Repurposed Energy. And in this article, we are focused on, we think there should be more focus on new renewable energy plants on already distressed land. So targeting closed coal mines, closed landfills, coal plants that are in the process of closing, also marginal farmland and underutilized industrial lands, and that there should be a lot more financial support and also expedited permitting for projects on those sites. I'll talk about that a little more in a minute. But then the other thing that I want to mention sort of in the latter part of my remarks is to how I think we need to shift the narrative on clean energy transition from this sort of focus on fear and distrust to really excitement and community benefit. So with my remaining time, I'll talk about both of those issues. So here are some headlines and some photos of what I mean when I say repurposed energy. So Amazon just announced the first of its renewable energy projects. Amazon buys a lot of renewable energy and helps to develop a lot of projects. This is their first one on a brownfield, so on an abandoned coal mine, and it reports that it's going to do more like this if it can. Xcel Energy in Minnesota is retiring its largest coal plant. It's already started the retirement process. It's the largest source of CO2 emissions in the state. It's a massive coal plant just outside the Twin Cities. As it's retiring the coal plant, it is building a huge solar farm plus battery storage, longer-term battery storage, and I think it has some DOE funding for that long-term battery storage on that site. One of the benefits, of course, is you already have great transmission infrastructure there, and that plant will not have to wait in these long interconnection queues to connect to the grid, it can use the transmission line that's already there because Xcel is involved in the development. We can do a lot more of projects like this as we close coal plants around the country. And then this other one is focusing in on just all of the landfills we have around the country that are really suitable for solar development. And that's a project EPA has actually been working on for many years. They call it Repowering America's Land. So we need to really expedite and accelerate that. Here's some photos of a wind project on a former steel plant in Buffalo, New York. So that is possible too if you think about sort of industrial areas that are really being underutilized now. Oftentimes it works better for solar than it does for wind, but you can do it for wind as well. And this shows some solar projects constructed on landfills in New Jersey. 2 of them are in New Jersey, 1 of them is in Atlanta. So we can continue to do this all over the country. So what are some of the benefits of repurposed energy? We actually have a lot of land that's available for projects like these. So there was a study done that looked at what are our marginal lands, and estimated that about 11% of the US is marginal lands. Now that's not an exact match with our repurposed energy definition. It also includes things like highway rights of way, but there's a pretty good overlap there. So we have a lot of land available. It also avoids using kind of what we call greenfield, sensitive environmental areas, other aesthetically beneficial lands for new renewable energy. So potentially you have a lot less controversy over building projects on lands like this. I also think there's a better balance of urban and rural lands. I think there's a lot of concern in rural areas. Why do we have to build all this new renewable energy that's going in large part to cities and to population centers? And so if you really focus in on closing coal plants and on industrial areas, I think you can get a better balance of urban and rural lands. Also, these sites, they've got good access to transmission lines, usually good interconnections, they've got roads, and there's also a lot of incentives in the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act for lands like this. So, Congress has already directed some federal funding to, quite a bit of federal funding to projects in what are known as energy communities, sort of communities that have closed coal plants, that have a closed coal mine, or otherwise are sort of tied to a fossil fuel energy economy. So focusing on repurposed energy can sort of build on that, those congressional authorizations. There's some pretty significant benefits to communities too. Some are the same as benefits of new clean energy projects in general, and some are specific to repurposed energy. So anytime you're going to have a new wind or solar project, there's going to be taxes and lease payments to landowners and communities. So there are lots of local communities, particularly in rural areas, where a solar farm comes in, a wind farm comes in, and their local budget for schools, for fire, for parks has now doubled or tripled. So you have major investments in communities. You also, and for lands where the plant actually is, those private lands, quite lucrative for landowners. I actually think those payments need to be shared with neighbors in a better way so that you don't have neighbor against neighbor who has the wind turbine on their land versus their neighbor who has to look at it but perhaps doesn't get the same financial payments. Same with solar. I think in Europe they do much more of that. We could innovate with that here. In New York, communities that host new renewable energy sites, they get energy bill credits, so you actually see a decrease in your energy bills. So how can you get direct benefits to those communities? And then there's much more discussion about community benefit agreements, both at the federal level and the state level. So for all of the Department of Energy money that's going out through these new laws, there have to be part of the application for that grant money is community benefits agreements with those communities, but states do that as well. So Michigan's new law requires $2,000 per megawatt of capacity through a community benefits agreement with that community for fire, for police, for other infrastructure things. And then when we talk about repurposed energy projects, there's additional benefits. So The properties, there's going to be remediation of contaminated property. Most of these properties are brownfields. These are properties that are land that isn't being used for something else. You're not going to build housing on it. You're not going to build a city center on it, but it could be used for solar or wind. And so you can have economic revitalization where you're not going to get that necessarily from other forms of development. Okay, so one of my last points here is on this idea of building narratives. I really think we need to reconsider how we communicate the clean energy transition. You think about what the fossil fuel industry has done for years, have communities take pride in what they're doing, pride in powering America. There's, in coal country, you've got museums, you've got sort of touch and feel type of things, getting the community engaged in the industry. I don't think the renewable energy industry has done that as well. You want to build excitement and hope around these new technologies and innovation. So why don't we have museums and learning centers and tours of projects in rural areas and in urban areas to help people learn about solar energy, about wind energy. It's really fun to go up in a wind turbine. I've done that many times, and go out on like the lookout post and climb the ladder, go up in the elevator. And I think to the extent that we can reach out to communities that way and make these projects a part of the community and part of our new clean energy economy, I think we can build a lot of excitement and hope. And there needs to be more conversations with communities about their needs, about their concerns, echoing Eric's point earlier. Particularly because even if you have communities that are skeptical of climate change, they know what's happening on the ground in their communities. Water resource problems, extreme weather, reduced services and revenue. So I think you can start conversations on concerns that all people are feeling right now, whether they're rural or urban, and how clean energy investment can address these local concerns. I think it's incumbent certainly on renewable energy developers, it's incumbent on environmental groups, and it's incumbent on regulators as well to be promoting and having these conversations. I think aesthetics are important too. A lot of people will tell me, yeah, solar's great, but it's so ugly, right? Does it have to be ugly? I don't think it has to be ugly. I was actually giving a presentation at the University of Pennsylvania at their Energy Policy Center a few weeks ago, and I talked to a landscape architect who all of his work now is focused on the aesthetics of renewable energy projects and making sure that new solar projects work with the landscape and work with the communities. I don't know if you saw, there was an article in the New York Times maybe a month ago about wildlife corridors in large solar projects, and basically saying it's not difficult to do, but people don't think to do it. So really showing how, particularly with solar and wind, how you can do pollinator habitat, crops. To some extent, you can do bees, and I think, we got some sheep here too. You can do some grazing as well. And of course, with agrivoltaics, there are also sort of new crops that can now be grown in places like Arizona because you have the shade from the solar panels. So there's a lot of really exciting things going on. And I will leave you with the picture of the animals. And we have some cows too. It's always good to have cows in wind farms. So I'm done, and I really look forward to any questions that you have. I don't know how much time we have for questions.
We have 12 minutes.
Oh, wonderful. Okay.
Excellent. Just a reminder. Just a reminder. Just a reminder to folks. Go to slido.com. In the text box there's a ampersand or the hashtag, and you can just write Stegner in there. You'll see the list of questions. Even if you don't have them, you can upvote. You can upvote some that have been asked. So let me just get to our list. Let's see. Hold on. Sorry, got a couple. So here we have a question from Josh Kraft. Red and blue states have been diverging in terms of providing support for zero emissions electricity resources, that's the blue states, versus seeking to extend the life of existing coal plants, like Utah or red states. What are the implications of this?
Depends how successful they are, right? So it will be interesting to see how, on the extending the life of coal plants, I mean, the main way that states would try to do that is subsidies, right? Because coal plants are now expensive as compared to other sources of energy. So you either have to subsidize them, which means ratepayers in the state are going to be paying lots more money for electricity than they should to subsidize coal plants. Seems like a bad idea. Or what some states are doing, this is particularly true in North Dakota, is putting a huge amount of money in policy development towards carbon capture sequestration. And of course, Congress has authorized a lot of money for carbon capture sequestration as well, because in order to get these laws passed, you need to compromise and you need to get enough votes. And so for members of Congress who are in states that want to support existing gas, existing coal, and the industries associated with that, carbon capture sequestration is, seen as a way to potentially extend the life of those investments. Right now, it's still really expensive. I think carbon capture sequestration has a place, certainly with regard to industries that have been harder to decarbonize, like the steel industry. I think it's important to invest money in those technologies. I think my personal view, using them to keep open coal plants is just a bad idea economically and environmentally. It's a huge amount of money that we could be spending elsewhere. But I think that's the effort, right? And so we're going to have to see how that plays out. I mean, there have been decades of trying to spend money on carbon capture sequestration, and we haven't made really that much progress. And I think that's going to have a lot of the same permitting issues and permitting difficulties at the state and local level that we've seen for permitting anything, right? So states and local governments are often against building the carbon dioxide pipelines that you're going to need to bring CO2 from where it's captured at a coal plant to a subsurface storage area. I think you're going to see opposition to the storage basins for CO2. So those are not going to be easy to permit either. So I do think it's important to keep in mind, though, that Texas does not have any climate policies, right? Other than we don't want to do anything that has anything to do with climate change. But that's where all the wind is being built, all the solar is being built, and all the batteries are being built. So you can build a lot of things in states that don't necessarily have favorable policies on climate. So you need to make sure that I think my understanding in terms of Texas is you don't really have to worry about local zoning authority, and it's not that the state is doing it, it's that in a lot of places there is no zoning authority. You can just build what you want. That makes it very easy for a developer, right? If you have a willing landowner and a developer, you just build the project. It is actually in blue states where you have the more burdensome permitting requirements. So it's often more difficult to build projects in California, in New York, which is why it's those states that are sort of moving away from their strict permitting requirements to try to make it easier. So I think a lot of this is going to be on how successful those states are in terms of promoting renewable energy and other infrastructure projects. I mean, we can have the same conversation about high-speed rail, light rail, affordable housing, all of these infrastructure. How do we build new infrastructure in this country? And there's a lot of really good debates going on about that now.
This could be short, but a commenter had something very specific about our local flavor here. Any comments on Utah's new law seeking guaranteed coal-fired future?
So I don't know what that law is, but it sounds like it's a subsidy for the coal plants here. Seems like a bad idea. Can't say more without any more details, but aren't we going to have a Utah-focused panel at some point? Maybe that'll be a topic of conversation.
Yeah, thank you. The energy curves that you showed show that while green energy is growing, there hasn't been so much of a reduction of gas and coal, but just more increased energy use. Given electric cars and electrifying buildings, when will we begin to see real emission reductions?
Okay, so we have seen a significant decrease in the use of coal. Coal, so I used to do, with Bill Prince, do work for the Black Thunder coal mine in Wyoming. Massive coal, massive coal mine. And the idea that in the Midwest, where I lived, you wouldn't use mostly coal to generate electricity. This was like in the year 2000. That was like fringe crazy talk, right? And now all of those utilities in the Midwest, like in the next few years, are closing all of their coal plants. So coal is on the decline. And up until now, electricity use, our electricity demand has not increased. It, in fact, has not increased for decades. Why is that? Because of energy efficiency, right? So our electricity use has not increased. Now, it is going to increase, right? Because as we move to electric vehicles, it is going to increase. Also, a lot of the sort of AI and crypto is already starting to see an increase in electricity. But just keep in mind that electricity demand has been flat for like many, many, many years up until now. So we have not been having this continuing increase in electricity demand, even while economic growth has skyrocketed. Those two things used to go together, right? Economic growth meant increase in electricity demand. That's not true anymore. Those are now decoupled, which is a really, really good thing. But yes, we are going to have more electricity demand, which if we can build enough renewables, it means everyone's costs are going to go down because those costs, even though there's big infrastructure costs, are going to be distributed among more users of electricity. But the question is, what are we going to build? And what we need to build is more renewable energy, both for air pollution reasons, for decarbonization reasons, and now for cost reasons. It's just the cheapest.
Okay, this is a related question. Today's New York Times warns of a new surge of power use of threatening U.S. climate goals. How will renewable sources provide enough electricity to power the rapid growth of data centers, electric vehicles, manufacturing, et cetera?
We need to build more, right? We have the land available to do that. NREL and the other researchers, they know what those projections are. And so we need to build a lot of new wind, solar, offshore wind. I mean, offshore wind will be brand new, right? So a new massive source of renewable energy that we have not used in this country. We have the opportunity and the technology and the ability to do it. We just need to accelerate what we're doing. And we need continued investment. We need permitting reform. And we also need, I would say, a call to sort of environmental groups to really focus on being a part of the clean energy transition, because oftentimes on local projects, it's hard to reach agreement. So some of the national environmental groups have really made a turn on that and are very engaged in a clean energy transition and building electric transmission lines and wind and solar projects, but we need more of that.
This one may be the last one. This is from Ben Abbott. Thanks for the great presentation. You mentioned health and climate benefits of the transition. How much do you think these should be emphasized versus economic dominance of intermittent renewables?
So, renewables will not be intermittent or variable once we get battery storage online or have a big enough transmission grid. So I think it's sort of a false, it's the wrong conversation to say that like wind and solar, they're not as reliable, right? We can't use them all the time. Every energy resource has its limitations. Coal piles freeze, gas lines freeze. Nuclear energy has its own concerns as well. So they're all different, and you need policies and you need governance that deals with the energy resources we have. So we have to build a new system to accommodate renewable energy, but that's a good thing. And that is why the costs of renewable energy have gone down, and now we have to have policies around that. So we have that piece. And what was the first part of the question?
So I think that should we be talking more about the health benefits of the transition versus the economic benefits? I mean, that might be another way to frame the question.
I mean, I think we need to talk about both, right? I mean, I do think we often underplay, people don't always recognize how many people die every year and how many people go to the hospital and have less productive lives than they should because of air pollution from fossil fuels, period. I mean, we do think about it in the context of like in India with like indoor wood burning stoves. We're learning more and more about that, but that's true here in the United States as well. Air pollution is a huge killer of people and is a huge burden on our society, but it's almost invisible, right? Because it happens slowly and it's just a part of life. The idea with the transition, that will go away. The health benefits are so significant associated with that transition. So to the extent we're not talking about that every day, we should be. But I think talking about the economics is important too, both in terms of benefits to communities that are hosting these projects and the benefits to society in general. So I say both.
All right. I think that we're at time. Can we give Professor Klasse another round of applause? So our next activity is a break. We will take a break. Be back by 11. Be back by 11. We'll have a break. Thank you.